There were 298 people on board flight MH17. All of them were killed. There were Malaysians, Australians, British, Belgians, Indonesians, one Canadian, Dutch, Germans, and Filipinos. They will not be able to call those to justice, those who sent their plane to the furnace of war in Donbass. But they have a voice. That voice is a German lawyer, Professor Elmar Gimula, the most authoritative aviation lawyer in Europe. He represents the German relatives and is ready to represent all others of the MH17 victims, and has already filed multi-million euro claims against Ukraine in the European Court of Human Rights. Professor Gimula bases his claim on international aviation law, by which each country bears responsibility for the safety of its own airspace. The Ukrainian government, instead of closing the airspace of the east of the country, where it had waged a full-scale war against the rebellious Donbass, had basically directed the flight MH17 straight into that war furnace. For that reason, Kiev authorities bear direct responsibility for the death of 298 people. More about that in an exclusive interview with Professor Gimula, which he gave in Berlin in the context of our MH17 inquiry.
I deal with aviation now for about 35 years from now. My profession, my education is the legal one. I'm a lawyer. And 35 years ago, I've decided to concentrate on aviation and aviation law. And this is what I do right now, also regarding assisting families of air crashes who have lost their loved ones in air crashes in getting their compensation, getting their rights. I have dealt with a number of major air crashes over the past, say, 20 years, such as Concorde, the mid-air collision above Lake Constance, where a Russian plane was involved, Air France 447 above South Atlantic, Maiden of the Seas, which is Lockerbie, and MH17, of course. On the plane were 4 German citizens, and 3 out of the 4 families have instructed me after the crash to represent their interests vis-à-vis the Malaysian Airlines company or vis-à-vis anybody who could have contributed to the crash. In my view, mainly the Ukrainian government is to blame for the crash, and this is why we have filed a complaint with the European Court of Human Rights, because we consider this negligence of the Ukrainian government as a violation of human rights, the killing of nearly 300 innocent people, amongst others, the relatives of my clients.
Professor Gimula, which kind of law, in other words, the aviation law or another type of law, applies to this case and why?
Well, this is very interconnected. Of course, aviation law is the main legal basis for it, but aviation law turns exclusively against the airline, and we consider the airline, including the passengers, of course, as the victims of what happened above eastern Ukraine. The immediate financial consequences of a crash, like organizing the funeral and so on and so forth, is compensated by Malaysian Airlines. This is the regular, way you go through after such a crash. It's not just about paying compensation, it's just finding out who has caused the crash, who could have prevented the plane from crashing. And this is not the Malaysian airline company, this is the Ukrainian government. And this is why we have decided to file the lawsuit at the European Court of Human Rights on the basis of the Human Rights Convention, where Ukraine is member to.
Albeit all passengers of the flight MH17 shared the same fate, each passenger's story is tragic in its own way, such as the fate of the passenger, for example, who was looking forward to a long-awaited reunion with his children lost to him following his divorce, who found their father just to lose him again, this time forever.
My father was in there. I was very young at my parents parted. There was a normal person in front of the house. We go in the flat, we sit down, and then we talk, and he say me, yes, your father was on this flight, and we have to identify and need your DNA. It was a strange feeling because we never see it before, but I know he was my father. I come from him. For my sister, it was harder because she tried to contact him very intensive, and then it was finished. He was away. We hear nothing from the Ukraine or something because you never know what happens correctly.
Based on international law, on international legal considerations, and the whole of the international law, the whole system, legal system on our globe is based on the aspect of sovereignty of the states. When it comes to aviation, of course, the question is the airspace above state territory, is it also state territory? Yes, it is, because Chicago Convention, where Ukraine is a member to, states expressively that the airspace is part of the territory of a state, with the consequence that each state, each government is also responsible for what happens in the airspace.
The majority of the so-called investigations, especially the ones that presume Russia's guilt, seem to be almost intentionally focused on details, on sorts of purely technical aspects of the case. Everything is scaled down to a simple question as to who pressed the red button in that book, or whether it was a book or something else. If we take, for example, the Nuremberg trials, did they judge those who were actually pulling the trigger? Or were those on trial who, like the Red Army then and Donbass rebels now, fought to protect their land and were shooting back? No, it was those who were responsible for the war crimes who were tried and sentenced. The court of history has made its judgment. It's still evident in Berlin, which was freed from fascism by the Red Army. The capture of Berlin panorama in the Moscow Central Museum of the Great Patriotic War is a spectacular reminder. Those who inflame the fires of war in Ukraine and hope to incite the British and the Americans against the Russians forget that both Britain and America are not uniform. They think that certain parallels between the USSR and Russia will frighten the public. But forget that in the Second World War. The sympathies of the British and the Americans laid with the Red Army. The American paper, the Washington Post, wrote, "One trembles at the mere thought what might have happened if the Red Army had collapsed under the pressure of the attacking German forces, or if the Russian people had been less steadfast and fearless." English newspapers acknowledged that without the Red Army, the fate of the free nations would have been dark indeed. This year, on Victory Day in Moscow, there were guests from Britain in the ranks of the Immortal Regiment. The Scots with the portraits of their relatives who served in the Arctic convoys. They represent Britain, which did not forget that Russia played the central role, the principal role amongst the Allies, and that Russia rejects fascism on the genetic level. No matter how fascism masks itself and whatever forms it takes, then, at the time of the Great War, or when its ghost has appeared in Europe again, now in Ukraine.
Very emotional to be here on such a day, but Moscow itself is just the most amazing city. Only been here a day so far. I've already promised my daughter I'll take her back, so hopefully for a Victory Day parade again. It's just unbelievable. The friendliness of the people, I think, and the welcoming aspect of it all, just feel very much at ease here. Just lovely.
Scotland's a very passionate country, it's a very friendly country, it's a very colourful country, and from what I've seen of Russia, only in one day, there are a lot of similarities. I'll be carrying the picture of my father, who's still alive. He's 90 in his 91st year, and he took part in 6 of the Arctic convoys in 1944 when he was only 18 years old. So I'm carrying his picture. He couldn't travel, he would have loved to be here, but he's just at an age that he can't travel, so I'm very, very proud to be here with his medals and to carry the picture of him this afternoon.
I'm also carrying a picture of my father, who was again served in the convoys like Graham's father in 42 and 43. My father is now 92 and also unable to travel, but it's a great honour to be here and again wearing his medals and very proud.
Overwhelmed is probably the best word to actually use to describe it. Yesterday we went to that lovely museum of the Second World War, and that was totally overwhelming. There was times where I actually wanted to cry because I was thinking about the guys and the men who had fought in that war. And I think today, being here with the military parade going on behind us, and we're waiting on the fly past, and then being able to join in with the people in the march on the Regiment of the Immortals March, I can't really sum it up. It's just so tremendous and so fantastic. I see all these people on the roof here. They're all wearing their ribbons, the same as we wear our poppies at home in November. But I see the young children with their military hats on, and they're remembering as well. And just the whole thing, as I say, it's overwhelming. It's undescribable. Well, if you don't put this on your bucket list and see it before you die, I'm very, very sorry for you, because this is the most amazing and beautiful city. We were here 8 years ago. None of these buildings over there were here. The whole skyline here is just amazing. Down in the streets, lovely people, lovely, clean streets. And as for the metro, oh man, I wish you could export that to Orkney. It would be brilliant.
Бессмертный полк – это абсолютно изнутри народа идет. Для русских всех национальностей, как я говорю. Да здравствуют русские всех национальностей. Это такая церковная история, конечно, которая объединяет все конфессии, все национальности, мужчин и женщин, маленьких и больших. Это то, на чем, наверное, сейчас мир может удержаться, на чем мы можем удержать мир, сдержать приход тьмы. Если так глобально уже говорить.
Both the flight MH17 sent to that furnace of war and thousands of civilians who were killed during the Ukrainian army's operations in Donbass, including 200 children, 85 of whom were MH17 passengers, are all on Kiev's hands. And though we are sure that that red button was pressed, not by rebels, neither by the Russians, the major culprit here is not the one who did it, but in this new big game, a hidden hand which was moving all the pieces on the Ukrainian side of the chessboard. This chessmaster's real goal is Russia, whilst the MH17 and even Ukraine itself are, alas, only pawns. Only Ukraine, sadly, still remains unaware. Insight and judgment are due, the former for Ukraine, and the latter for those in Kiev who are responsible for war crimes in Donbass, including the downing of MH17.
The basic, if you like, the constitution of international aviation is the Chicago Convention, which has been entered into force in 1949, and 191 governments in the world have signed this convention. So nearly the whole world, apart from very tiny isolated countries, are members of the Chicago Convention. And the organizer of the whole system is the International Civil Aviation Organization. So you are a member of this organization if you sign the Chicago Convention. In doing this, you oblige yourself to some behavior which is based on the principle of sovereignty of the government. Article 9, in addition to this, Article 9 of the Convention says, well, if there is a military conflict or something which could get in contradiction to safe aviation, then the government must close the airspace. It's expressly stated in Chicago Convention. So everything what happens there was under the responsibility of the Ukrainian government. In my view, I would say, well, given the background and the occurrences before this crash, the Ukrainian government was fully aware that the civil traffic was highly endangered and they did not protect it. Call it negligence, I would say it was intentional.
Not far from the tourist border of the Soviet and the American sectors in Berlin, there is this Ukrainian flag with a message to Russia's president. However, the meme turned out to be contrary to its author's intentions. Because of sloppy punctuation, from our point of view, taking into account the colon, which precedes a quote rather than indicates an addressee, this message is right on the mark. In other words, President Putin could indeed himself say this to the hawks in Berlin and in Paris, in London and in Washington. Abandon your geopolitical ambitions and set the whole of Ukraine free. Let's add to that, and Donbass as well. Our next episode is now in the works, and you will see it here shortly, in the context of our MH17 inquiry. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.